right now, but we're not on, are we live? No. Let's just have fun. We'll make it comfortable, and I'll try to make it fun.
Excellent.
So I'd like to get started probably what, in a minute? We got people, yeah, okay, we're getting some folks out there. Okay. You want to get started? Everyone, let's go. So tell me when you're going to move over so I can then.
You can go, Frank.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CHTA and CTO Disaster Management Learning Session. My name is Frank Comito. I'm the Special Advisor to CHTA and former CEO and Director General. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us. This is the second in a series around disaster management, crisis management, and readiness sessions that CTO and CHTA have partnered on. When we got together a month ago, about 3 weeks ago, we learned a little bit about the outlook for the season, the hurricane season. We learned about readiness, destination readiness plans, and there was quite a bit of good insight on best practices and some of the challenges that we face to be as effective as we can be to move towards recovery. So today we're going to, and we learned that we've got quite an active hurricane season approaching us, and we're seeing some of that swirling around us as we speak today. So today we're going to focus on at the destination level, at the company level more so, about readiness planning, and we've got a great lineup. But before we get into that, let me do a little bit of housekeeping and a little bit of announcing first. Just for those of you that aren't, next slide, please. CHTA will be holding the region's largest B2B marketing event in Puerto Rico, October 3rd through 5th. It's the 40th anniversary of Caribbean Travel Marketplace, which was underpinned much of our activity as a region, our tourism activity. So the early bird rate is available until tomorrow. So if you haven't signed up for that, you need to make sure that you do so. And you can go to our website right there, special landing page for Marketplace to learn all you need to know about it. So next slide, please. Certainly CTO took the lead on the first session. We're taking the lead on this session, and we want to certainly encourage people to be members of both CTO and CHTA if they're a destination or if they're a company that does business with DMOs and the government side of things in tourism. There's membership opportunities within CTO as well. And with CHTA, we've got a bevy of membership benefits and opportunities. You can go to our website there, CaribbeanHotelAndTourism.com, to learn more about it if you're not already involved. Next slide, please. We have a fantastic experienced learning group together for you. And in fact, when I was mulling it over, including myself, if you look at the folks on the screen there, plus myself, we have been through collectively almost 100 tropical storms and hurricanes. That's a lot, okay? So I myself have been through 16, and those are major tropical storms and hurricanes, not just those little ones, those 40-mile-an-hour blows. So not only have we been through them, we've been involved in them at different levels, as both you know, at practitioner levels that we're at right now. We're going to get into the talent of this fantastic panel that we've got lined up for you shortly. So I'm going to just give an overview of each of them right now, and then when we go right into the session, they're part of the session, so we'll just jump right into it. But we're going to have a leadoff hitter today is Jennifer Nugent-Hill. That Jennifer is basically rooted in tourism. I first got to know Jennifer and her incredible background in many different areas in the 1980s when we were both working in the United States Virgin Islands. And she actually was the first executive director for a group called the Virgin Islands Tourism Awareness and Advancement Link. So you know that she's rooted in tourism, even though she's been in the shipping industry for a good part of her career. She presently is with Tropical Shipping, where she's been with for over 20 years. She's their Director of Government and Community Affairs, well engaged. Tropical is it's certainly in their business interest, but it's also part of their community benevolence activities as well. Incredibly supportive of disaster readiness and response and contingency planning and so on. And Jennifer's been a lot of the effort behind all of that, doing training sessions in various destinations. As you know, Tropical covers most of the Caribbean, and helping them to develop their contingency plans, but also helping them on the readiness side of it. And we know when a disaster strikes that Tropical is right there immediately, bringing in provisions and recovery, relief and recovery kinds of provisions, but also helping to get things back in order as supplies and other kinds of things are needed to recover and restore. So Jennifer will give us some great insights. That'll be followed by Stan Smith. Now, Stan has been an allied member of CHTA and for a number of years, and is considered one of with his company, Smith Orloff and Associates, is considered one of the world's leading insurance loss consultants for the hotel industry. And he's virtually has done this around the globe. And in the Caribbean, we know dozens of hotels have utilized their services in making a claim for a loss and helping to negotiate a claim. And he'll be providing some insights on how you can be most effective with your insurance planning and recovery efforts related to insurance. Very critical to getting operations back up and running. And then a third area of absolute essential, area for recovery management is communications and communication strategies, both before and after. And for that area, we're going to be joined by Greta from Marketplace Excellence, who's Vice President of Operations. Greta is no stranger as well. I think she's been involved in a number of countries on crisis management and recovery efforts. She's rooted as well in marketing and sales in the Caribbean, has done work in Barbados and other areas throughout the region with that. And Marketplace Excellence, as many of us know, is one of the leading public relations agencies for the Caribbean. And in that role as well, they have worked with destinations for over 10 years, like the U.S. Virgin Islands and Cayman Islands and so on crisis management and recovery, and have worked closely with CHTA and authored our communications crisis management guide as well. So Greta will provide some good insights in that way as well. And on the public sector side, our partner is Amanda Charles. Amanda has been she's tourism specialist for Caribbean Tourism Organization, but she's been involved in sustainable efforts in wearing numerous hats for various organizations, including the Association of Caribbean States, the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and has also is rooted in the Caribbean. Her Dominica, where she probably remembers in her youth some of the challenges with tropical storms and hurricanes that Dominica experienced. So again, firsthand experience on the ground, but also at the organizational level with CTO. And she'll be providing some insights on the kinds of resources and information and materials that are available both through CTO and through CHTA. So a great lineup. We're really looking forward to it. All seasoned vets. In addition, we've got a guy in backup for us as well. A hotelier will be an advisor. Jeff Birch, I believe, is joining us from Small Hope Bay Lodge in Andros in the Bahamas. And he's been through probably 25, 30 storms himself, at least, and we'll be providing some insights as we go through the discussion part of this. I want to emphasize that we want this to be engaging. Each of the presenters will present 5 to 7 minutes or so of background information, and then that'll be followed up by some Q&A that we'll have, and we want to have you well engaged, you members of the audience well engaged in that part of it. So if we can go to the next slide, that introduces us right to Jennifer. And before Jennifer takes the mic, you can ask questions at any time. I encourage you, if a question pops in your mind while someone's presenting, to jot it down. There's a box down there. It says Q&A, that icon. You click onto there, and you'll be able to plug in your question, and we'll be monitoring that as we go along. We got a backup crew who's monitoring it as well. And we want to encourage as much of that as possible. So without any further diatribe from me, let's go right into it. Jennifer, tell us what are the key elements of successful business continuity planning, and good morning to you, my dear.
Good morning, and good morning to the attendees, and of course my fellow panelists. It's wonderful to see Greta. I know her skills, I know her talents, and I certainly respect the work that they do. But thank you, Frank. You and I have traveled the roads for a very long time, and your commitment, I know, to the Caribbean is well regarded, highly respected, and we're thankful to be able to join the panel this morning. So, one of the things that I've learned over the years is, as it relates to business continuity and disaster readiness, is exactly that. You've got to be ready. How do you get ready? I remember when I joined Tropical Shipping, I had just left public office in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and my entry into the world of disaster management, best practices, really was my own experience with Hurricane Hugo and surviving that on St. Croix. And I watched the way that government and the business responded, reacted, recovered, didn't recover, lost of business. And I remember having to step into the role of rebuilding the territory's housing stock, the parks and recreation that were critical to the tourism industry. And I remember saying to myself, how do we do this? How do we gain the best way to do this? So when I joined Tropical and I was asked to assume the responsibility for the development of our best practices in business continuity, I felt like I hadn't learned a thing. I had seen the worst, I've seen the best, but how did I come to the place where I was able to share in that regard? So I went back to school. My company was generous in allowing me to go back to get a certification and develop my skill set in best practices in business continuity. And I've been doing this now for the last 20 years of my 27 years of tropical, coming up on my 27th year of tropical. And I can only say that the way we do this is exactly what CTO and CHTA is doing this morning, is sharing ideas, sharing best practices, and talking about it ahead of the disasters that we know we're going to experience, and in this case, our 2020. So next slide for me, please, if you don't mind, Darcel. We can skip to the next one. We're in hurricane season, we know it. The lessons that I'd like to share with you today is what I understand about the planning for today, which was on that previous slide. But it's always about preparing for the unthinkable. You can stay there. So your theme is about quickly restoring, rebuilding, and replenishing. And that is to get our industry, our tourism industry, and in this case, our hotel and our properties up and running. You can tap for me, Darcel, there's some more stuff. I always say the best practice about preparing or writing a business continuity plan is identifying certain words. My teachers used to say the best way to know whether or not you can speak to a topic is to define what that issue is. So for our conversation today, I wanted to just share the description of what I call the definition of disasters, and particularly as it relates to our industry, that of the tourism industry, and in our case, the maritime space as well. So define a disaster, you can see it. It is the disruption that you didn't plan for of your critical business processes, the things that makes your hotel function, the things that makes your industry move forward. So clearly defining what a disaster is helps you to create a policy statement for your hotel and the industry as a whole, but specifically to your property. In this case, it is that unplanned interruptions and disruptions, it will cost you. You will lose customers, you potentially will lose personnel. And in fact, one of the greatest issues for us in our region is the loss of our reputation as a destination of choice. And the sad part is it oftentimes can come, it goes towards what I call that extended period. Next slide, Darcel. So you don't want to be out of business for any long period of time. I met Frank back in the days when Frank was working with the Virgin Islands Chamber of Commerce, St. Thomas Chamber, and then the St. Croix Hotel and Tourism Association. And one of the things that the Chamber always said is one of four businesses may never return to its original state, or may never just reopen. Disasters, tap please, disasters. Question you ask yourself, is your hotel prepared? Are you prepared to respond and recover when it happens? We know from, especially with Frank, citing so many experiences with hurricanes and storms and tropical storms, is that it will happen. It's a matter of when. So the question you have to ask yourself as you're preparing towards your own planning for your business continuity is, are you ready? Next slide. So if the goal is to be to quickly restore your business operations, you need to accept the fact that none of us are exempt from that. We now know it, and it doesn't matter whether it's a weather system or a pandemic or an epidemic, a fire, or reputational damage. A crisis happened at your property. Your plan should reflect that. And I'm going to leave that conversation to when Greta comes on. She's better at that than I certainly am. But the cost of not having a plan is really too risky. And it's just ridiculous not to do so. And without offending, it is ridiculous not to have a continuity plan. You will pay for it if you don't. And Stan will talk about the importance of having that from the perspective of insurance and what insurance carriers are now seeking after a disaster. They want to see whether or not you had a contingency plan. Next slide. So here's what I would like to suggest as a basic part of preparing your own continuity plan. It starts with the leadership. It starts with whomever is in charge, whomever owned the property. If you have an organizational structure where you have executives, owners, or shareholders, but someone is in charge. So if you don't have the leadership, the executive sponsorship, then there's no way that you're really going to have a plan. The leader of the property, or the owner of the hotel, or the GM, must show and demonstrate interest and engagement. If not, your employees are not going to have either. Secondly, and one of the first things we say is you must do a risk analysis. You cannot write a plan where you don't know the threats and you're not familiar with the vulnerabilities. And there are vulnerability assessments that are available online. Some are free. I oftentimes go to websites. In my case, I use one that we have as a standard for those of us who are in the shipping business. But there are free sites. There are free links. I must say at this point that one of the things that I've been impressed with at CHTA for the past couple of years that we've been engaged in partnership is the CHTA plan for hotels recovery is probably one of the best that I've seen in terms of an industry or an association. So know your risk and write your plans to those vulnerabilities. You may not be vulnerable to everything, even though I know climate change has caused a lot of shift now in terms of our own threats and vulnerability. The second part is once you understand what your risk is, you begin to write a plan as it relates to the impact. The impact tells you whether or not you're vulnerable to, say, for example, volcanoes, which most of us in the region will have some impact. We now know. Earthquakes, we're seeing the frequency of the shakings in the various parts of the region, thanks to SEDEMA and the team that puts out those reminders, oftentimes, and in the US Virgin Islands, who's partnered with so many seismic agency. Conduct that business impact. Know whether or not you're vulnerable mainly to fires or to hurricanes or to tropical storms. Some of the islands in the region are not necessarily directly aligned with hurricanes, even though I think I should change that statement because Trinidad is experiencing its most recent severe tropical storm. We were worried that it was going to get to a category 1. So Trinidad typically doesn't have direct impact from hurricanes. They said, neither does the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and so forth. But we are now beginning to understand that that's necessarily true. But you have to write your continuity plan towards what your potential impact is. And then contingency. Does your plan have all of the contingency that you may need to have in place? Insurance coverage, which you will hear a little bit more. And then I always say, determine the absolute minimum personnel requirement that you need to have in order to get your business up and running again. I know COVID has shifted even that in terms of our protocols with regards to what are the absolute minimum, because some of us are probably now feeling the impact of our staff being out from COVID and so forth. Next slide. So a business continuity plan is about preparedness. It prepares your business and your staff to respond effectively to whatever that impact or that crisis or that disaster. It minimizes the effect of the disaster. It does not prevent. I think the new theory that all of us who have gone to school in business continuity as professionals are now saying that your plan is not to eliminate. The plan is to minimize the impact because we can't eliminate disasters. It's going to happen. But it also allows you to enhance the response for your operations. And the bottom line, which Greta will talk to you about, I'm sure, is the idea of your continuity preparedness, your continuity plan and preparedness is to control the outcome of the impact, especially how you communicate. Next slide. Control the outcome. Your plan should be based on certain assumptions. The assumption is that you will be impacted. Your organization's ability to continue to support essential operations like your guest services. Think about your plan in that regard. What are some of the things I must do to ensure that I can continue to support the guests in my hotel if they're there? Secondly, your personnel, the employees, your team, your staff may be victims themselves and probably won't be available. The manager of the property may not even be available. So you've got to figure out how your organizational leadership will define what those necessary things that you must have to continue and to create what I call a succession plan so the business is not impacted. Forgive that typo there in my spelling. And then, of course, you have to also assume that you may be affected in your local community. The critical resources may not be available. Just think about what happened with the volcano in St. Vincent last year and how they were able to recover. And I can share some examples with regards to how I know Michelle Forbes in St. Vincent was able to respond and lives were saved in that island. So always presume that the local resources, the critical resources on the island or in your location may not be readily available. Next slide. So a well-developed continuity plan, and I only share four key points, but there's multiple aspects of what a good continuity plan should look like, or an effective continuity plan. First of all, it assesses the hotel functions, whether you do, especially internally and externally. What are the things that you do at your specific property? And it may be different for each property, depending on your size and how you support your guest. But you've got to presume and know what that is. So when we say assess, we talk about test. Do self-evaluation, do self-assessment. What are the functions? Who's responsible for flipping the switch when there's a power failure? What are your maintenance crew doing to make things work? It is amazing that they know when something goes wrong and they fix it. Ask them to tell you what they do and write it down. Basic things. Identify the protocols and resources that you must have and figure out a way where you will have your backup for those protocols and the resources to restore your hotel properly. I would be really not doing you good if I did not talk about item number 3. If you don't have a relationship with your local Office of Emergency Management, you really don't have a plan to recover. We oftentimes, especially those of us in the private sector who are not engaged with the local emergency management agencies, fail our properties or fail our business. I always say build relationships with first responders, get to know them and let them know your property and know how your plan works as much as you're willing to share, but engage them, coordinate with them. And then I have to say that lessons learned over the years is how well we work with our bankers, the suppliers, insurance providers, our logistics partners, individuals who move our goods and bring our supplies and so forth. I will tell you that I am now encouraging every business that I talk to, every organizations, nonprofit included, is ask your suppliers and your providers about their continuity plan. Some of us don't even know whether or not they've got backup plan for their cybersecurity systems. And you may be impacted because they failed to have a cybersecurity plan or a business continuity and you're left stuck. Next slide. I'm going through this pretty fast because the time is more important to me to hear your questions. So here are some of the lessons I learned. Who's in charge? There must be someone that is in your chain of command that has established some protocols and defined who's in charge. And guess what? Sometimes it's not even the owner of the property or the GM. The GM needs to be looking around the surface and trying to figure out who's going to get this rolling. Then I oftentimes tell you, if you don't take care of your people, they will not take care of your business. Take care of your people. And I oftentimes add their families into your plan. Take care of your people and their families. Sometimes it may mean providing housing for them in your property if you have space, so that you know your staff is there to help you restore your property. If your plan does not concern yourself with your people, you don't have a plan. And then finally, communicate and communicate well, and you will hear more about that. Final slide. So here's what I would suggest. Lessons from the past and take them into the future. We're going to experience hurricanes. We're going to experience a pandemic and other natural disasters. Know that all disasters, however, and the response to it is at the local level. The regional responses may come. I oftentimes said to people back in 1989 when Hurricane Hugo hit St. Croix and destroyed the island, everyone thought, where was FEMA? We didn't even know who FEMA was. They came, but they came late. So the question oftentimes is, how am I engaging at the local level with regards to the response? Who's going to take care of the property and secure it? Who's going to ensure if there's something that requires safety in terms of police and public safety? They don't know you, you won't know them. The recovery timing is important for resiliency. Planning for your continuity requires collaboration and partnership, and we're going to talk about that a little later on during our forum. Next slide. And wrapping this up, here are some basic guides for appropriate action. Ensure the safety of your personnel during a disaster. Minimize the damage by protecting your assets and knowing how to protect them. Knowing your risk and your vulnerability, and most importantly, test your plan, exercise it, build muscle into your plan so you can adjust as needed. Lessons learned is oftentimes come from the gap that we find when we exercise our plan. And then always assure your community, the stakeholders, your guests about the return to normalcy, because that's your reputational side of it. So I want to thank you for this, and I'm available to answer question. Frank, I think I may have probably stepped over my 5 to 7 minutes there. So thank you, and back over to you for questions as we prepare for the unthinkable. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. And certainly whether you have, if you don't have a plan, Jennifer's made a case for you to have that plan. If you do have a plan, you need to constantly review it and update it and refresh yourself. The worst time to make a plan is during a crisis situation. And a key point out of that, I think that I got is take care of your staff, and they'll take care of your business and your customers as well. So that's absolutely essential. I've been astounded by the best case practices we've seen with companies that take care of their staff and how the staff pitches in and makes a huge difference in the recovery. So that's absolutely essential. So there are details. This is just an overview, and Jennifer made a great case as to why you need it and what are the key elements of it. But you can get some details on putting together your plan on CHTA and CTO's websites, and we'll talk more about that a little bit. Next up is, again, diving into the whole area of insurance. We just completed some research at CHTA. If you can go back, wrong slide there. We just completed some research at CHTA that we wanted to know a little bit about some cost concerns and operational cost concerns and so on. And one of the top 5 areas of cost concern, increased costs for businesses right now, particularly in this inflationary time, is the cost of insurance. So we know that insurance premiums are going up. They're going to continue to go up, at least in the near future. And so how do we not turn our back on having that essential part of our business operational budget? But how do we also do it in a way that's going to hopefully minimize our losses? And so Stan's going to talk to us a little bit about that and put it in the context of the times as well. Stan, you're up.
Yes. Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everyone. And let me compliment Jennifer on her usual excellent job at what she covers. And let me add one more thing, and you focused on it too, Frank, is the employees. Really successful recoveries that I've seen include when the property owner, before a loss occurs, when they know a storm is coming, will do things to help employees before the storm hits. If it's boarding up their houses, making sure they have supplies or whatever, so that the employees of the hotel can focus on the recovery. If we could go to the next slide, please.
Darcel or Claire, whoever's pulling up stands in. There we go. Great.
So recognizing I have about 5 or 7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at the most, my normal presentations on the subject can go anywhere from a half a day to 3/4 of a day. So certain of these items I'm just going to mention in passing and focus on what Frank mentioned, which is how can we try to manage the cost of insurance versus the risk. But before getting into that approach, I wanted to mention the key elements that should be addressed in reviewing an insurance policy. I've listed them, as you can see here on the slide. And Darcel, if you could bring up that first attachment. I did an extensive article for CHTA and also the Bahama Hotel Association on the subject of hurricane preparedness from an insurance standpoint. This is a copy of the document that is available on CHTA's website. And if we could just scroll through it, yeah, that's good. We see about the preparation. We talk about replacement cost versus actual cash value and what have you. If we could go back to the slide, the first slide, please. So that is available. where you can get more information on what I'm going to discuss. But the items, when you look at a policy, needs to say it's going to be the amounts of insurance for the applicable item, whether or not you want to use sublimits, what the deductibles are for windstorm, flood, earthquake, and volcanic action, which are typically a percentage. You want to try to make sure you have replacement cost coverage. And when I say make sure, sometimes to save costs, I've seen situations where coverage is provided on an actual cash value basis, which is not, it starts off with what's the cost to replace the damaged property, but then there's a depreciation factor applied for aging or the condition. I remember one situation years ago where a hotel had purchased actual cash value coverage because of their situation. They couldn't afford replacement value because the premium for actual cash value, needs to say, is going to be less. And over the years, they never realized, or no one realized, the broker didn't realize that things were such that they could afford replacement cost coverage, and then they did switch to it. Some of the other key terms of a policy is a co-insurance or averaging clause. I'm going to speak to that below in the presentation. I've bold printed agreed value endorsement. And I'm going to just spend a minute or two on that, because some of the suggestions I have for trying to control the cost of insurance is the use of this co-insurance or averaging clause, where you don't necessarily insure for 100% of replacement value. If you go down that road, it's very good to have an agreed value endorsement obtained from the underwriters, the insurers. And to do so, you need to have, in practically all cases, a replacement cost appraisal done. Not market value, but what's the cost to replace what's there. So that's something that's important. And if anybody has any questions, particularly on that, feel free to contact me, or we can ask in the presentation. Next item of significance, particularly to properties that have existed for a number of years, is whether or not there's certain current codes that would require things to be rebuilt differently. And there is specific coverage for that. One, I guess, basic thing might be electrical, where there's electrical code upgrades. Loss of off-premises power, business interruption, and dependent properties. And Jennifer alluded to this. If a property has certain suppliers or something special that they depend upon, if your property does not sustain damages from a storm, but your supplier or whoever that special entity is sustains damages and can't provide you with the service or items that you need, and it can cause you a business interruption claim, there is special insurance for that you can request. But again, you have to look at your individual needs. And talking about, dependent properties, I mean, the most basic one, for the Caribbean islands is what happens if something happens to the airport and guests can't come on island. Now, if it's really a bad storm and the airport gets damaged, your property is going to get damaged. But it's an extreme example of a dependent property. Also, the last item, foundations, walkways, roadways, and landscaping, but particularly foundations. Most policies provide that as an excluded property, meaning it's not covered. So particularly if you have cisterns in the foundations, or you're more susceptible to earthquake coverage or damages, it's something you want to have added back into your coverage. If we could move the slide up, please. So from the standpoint of trying to contain the costs of insurance, as Frank mentioned, it's a big expense item when you look at all your expenses and the percentage of revenue. And in talking about these items, if you have the benefit, so to speak, of having prior losses, you should call on that experience and what you learned from it to help evaluate some of the things that we're going to talk about. First of all, just to be clear, when we talk about premiums, it's the means to evaluate. The way to evaluate it is what percent is the premium as to the sum insured. And we're going to have a comparison of something shortly. First item to consider in trying to control costs is the use of sublimits for the catastrophic losses such as wind, flood, earthquake, tsunami, volcanic action. And tsunami coverage, you'll find it either under the earthquake or the flood endorsement. It won't be a separate item. And let's just say you have, and the example here of sublimits, if you insure your property for $5 million, maybe for winds, for these cat events, if you need to control the cost, and your experience is such as you really haven't experienced these events as other island countries have, pick a number of $2 million instead of $5 million. But address, know what the risk is. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a subsequent bullet point. So in addition to the use of sublimits, because the coverages or the perils of wind, flood, and earthquake, those are what really push your premium up, needless to say. The third item, use of deductibles. For the catastrophic events, the deductibles are a percentage of the sum insured. And if it's a non-cat event, it's going to be stated, the deductible will be stated in a dollar amount, whether it's $1,000, $2,500, or what have you. So when you go in for a renewal, ask the broker to quote the premium, the cost, based upon different deductibles. And if you could bring up the slide on that, I would appreciate it. So this is just a simple presentation, but and what you should do for helping to evaluate this. So the first column is the sums insured. So we indicate that the coverage for the buildings is $1.3 million. There's some contents coverage, and then what the total is. And it's just a simple calculation of applying 2%, 3%, or the 10%, and putting those numbers in and seeing what the premium is. For example, under a 2% cat.
Hello?
Hello.
I think we lost Stan for now.
We're
We
having a
lost man.
little freeze here. Well, Stan,
Maybe we come back in.
yeah, we can't hear you, Stan. I think we might have to come back if we can't get it back. And as soon as you come back on, we can pick up at this spot. But I'm going to go to communications at this point to Greta And then Stan, let us know when you're back on, and we'll finish you up. Greta is going to speak about managing your communications and public relations. We know that that if we don't control that, if we don't monitor that, it could be have a major impact on recovery and cost of business and sales and so on. And that's both at a destination as well as at a company level. Today, it's become more difficult to manage our communications, particularly because of the social media aspect of it and how misinformation can get out there very quickly, get picked up, and have some reputational damage as well. So Greta, you're going to talk to us a little bit about how to manage your communications and public relations.
Yeah. And so I also, just to let everyone know, I did work with CTO a little bit too, to kind of get some of their insights on destination level crisis comms. But seeing as today we're focusing a little bit more on the private sector, the individual business side of things, that's primarily where I will spend my time. But these things are applicable, you know, across the board.
Yeah.
And as I start, I think I just want to note that Jennifer and I might as well be singing from the same hymn book. It's all about a plan. It's all about preparation. And I think it's really important to recognize that your communications need to be built into that larger plan. You need to be thinking about all of the ways that you're going to communicate throughout. So Darcel, we can move on to the next slide, please. I think preparation and the planning phase is where you're going to spend the majority of your time thinking about your crisis communications. This is where you're going to do all the really hard work to set yourself up for success. And it's a lot of kind of what if conversations. You know, like I said, you're going to build this into your larger plan for any sort of crisis. And you're thinking of all of those scenarios, what might possibly happen. And then when and if it does, what do I need to have on hand so that I'm prepared to deal with it? Who are the audiences that I'm going to be speaking to? How do I want to speak to them? What are my tools that I have available to me? So you're going to be making tons and tons of lists. And these lists should be really very detailed. You don't want to have just sort of a general idea of the people you want to be communicating with. You want to have an actual list with real people, their positions, their contact number, their email, everything laid out so that you're not fumbling trying to find any of that when you need it. You need to identify who your stakeholders are. So you're thinking about, like we said, your employees, your people that you need to take care of, but then also any agencies that you work with, your PR agency, your advertising agency, travelers. Then also, I think it's really, really important to be aware of your allies and what they're doing in terms of planning. So think about your local hotel association, CHTA, CTO, some of the other local agencies, government agencies. Also, you want to be aware of your airline partners, your cruise lines, your wholesalers. Everyone is going to have their own plan, and you need to be aligned with them early on so that they know what your plan is, you know what theirs is, and you can be working together on communicating to the various audiences. And again, specific. You want actual names, numbers, everything very accessible to anyone that needs to pick it up when a crisis actually occurs.
And redundancy communications too.
Absolutely, because that person, if they're on island, you might not be able to reach them, or even on stateside, they might not be available. They might be on vacation or dealing with something else. You need redundancy built in, absolutely. And then when it comes to the tools that you're going to be using to communicate with your various audiences, think about all of the ways you're going to communicate. You're going to be doing news releases. Perhaps you're going to be doing press conferences. You need to think about the emails that you might be sending out, the social media posts you might be making, any interviews. So, you know, having some talking points. You're really trying to think of everything you might possibly need and then coming up with specific plans for them. You want to make sure that anyone who would be posting on social media has all the passwords and the access they need. Anyone who's responsible for making updates on your website has that login information and the tools to be able to make regular updates. Think about your website. Is it difficult to make a simple change? Is it difficult to put up a banner or a pop-up or, you know, any kind of news update without, you know, bringing in a design team? think about having a separate crisis communications website that is very easily maintained and updated with current relevant information. Think about your satellite phone situation. Do you have a satellite phone? Has it been tested? Does someone stateside have the number for your satellite phone? All those things need to be thought of ahead of time. And then someone mentioned this already, but having your sort of communications hub ready off island, stateside or elsewhere, is really very important, especially when we're thinking about weather crises. You know, when power and telecoms are down, you need to have someone who's going to be able to sort of be that person to reliably execute on the plans that you've come up with. It was really important for us during Irma and Maria in USVI, and then also with CHTA, where we were representing both. But communication in USVI was rough for a while, and it was hard to really maintain consistent communication with anyone within the Department of Tourism. So our team on the ground in the States was able to keep that messaging going, be sort of the communication conduit to anyone that we were able to communicate with, and just kind of keep that plan going. So it's really important for you to identify that ahead of time. If you don't have an office stateside, think about your public relations agency or your ad agency or someone else that can sort of be that resource for you off island. Other things that are important to think about, I talked about the having a communications website, a crisis communications website where you can have some of those updates, but think about websites as tools for communicating back and forth with stakeholders as well. We also worked with US Virgin Islands in sort of serving to help with mercy missions. You know, at the time when Irma and Maria hit, there were a lot of people on island that needed to get off still, whether that was tourists or people with medical emergencies, people who were not able to get flights out. So we were able to work with the allies, the cruise lines and the airlines, and then set up Google Forms, simple Google Forms for people to sort of register for evacuation and then communicate with them. So you need to kind of think about all of the tools that are available to you. And like I said, make sure everyone has logins, everyone has access that needs it. And then it's just really important that once you have these plans, you're training on them. Your staff needs to have the plan. Anyone that's going to be executing the plan needs to have the plan ahead of time. It needs to be something that you're training on regularly. I mean, you should even be running simulations. You know, it really is something you need to be doing at least prior to every hurricane season, updating the plan and then training the staff on it, making adjustments as necessary. And all of those numbers, all of those contacts that you found, they're going to change every single year. So you have to go back and make sure that you're current on them. And then going back to allies, I think it's important to take advantage of the resources that are out there. Frank's mentioned that CHTA has this crisis communications plan that we put together. We update that every year. It's available on our website. It's incredibly detailed, and you should use that as a tool, but then also, you know, consider building off of it for your own personal situation. And just really think about anything that could possibly happen so that when it happens, you're not trying to make it up as you go. Right, so let's move on to the next one. So then the crisis is here. Now you're in the response phase. What are you doing? You're gathering information, certainly. What is the situation on the ground? And then funneling that into your plan using this particular email templates that you might have set up. Put in the specific information, and now you're ready to disseminate that message. And you're constantly assessing and adjusting. You have to be nimble while things are happening. And then you're actioning the plans that you've started putting in place earlier. A couple of things that I wanted to point out about when the crisis is actually occurring. You need to be responsive to the media. If and when you're getting inquiries from the media, you have to respond, even if it's to say, I don't know yet. If they don't hear back from you, they're going to go looking elsewhere for another source. That source might not have correct information, and then it's just creating inaccuracies out there. So you do need to be responsive to the media. And I think it's also important you've got that one spokesperson that is speaking to the media. They have their talking points, And then you're also keeping track of the inquiries that you received, the responses that were given. So you have all those things going forward. You know what has already been said, and you can be consistent with your messaging. I think another thing to be aware of during the crisis, and to think about ahead of time, but as the crisis is developing too, you need to have a good plan for what you're going to do for cancellations. Do you have guidelines for postponement, refund plans for your customers? You need to be thinking about those things ahead of time so that you can be consistent with that messaging as well. Usually the local hotel association might have some guidelines for you. I know CHTA has put together guidelines as well. You want to be on the same level as what others in the industry are doing. You want to be fair, and you don't want to be making that up as you go along either. One other final thing I wanted to mention during a crisis, think about what's going on with your advertising. What do you have going on in the marketplace at the moment? Do you have ads running on social media or elsewhere? I mean, worst case scenario, best case, you're wasting money if there's a hurricane going on and you're advertising the sunny, beautiful weather in your destination. But worst case, it could be incredibly insensitive. It can be really very damaging to your brand. So consider putting a pause on your advertising until you know better what's going on with the crisis. All right, let's move on, Darcel, to recovery. So now the immediate crisis is over. You need to start figuring out what the situation on the ground is. Do an impact assessment, figure out how, what are those immediate things that you need to do to achieve stability, and then disseminate that accurate messaging to all of your various audiences. I think it's really important to realize that, of course, with every crisis, there's an opportunity. Once you know the situation and you're comfortable speaking about it, let the world know. If you're open for business, you're ready for travelers, tell the world. Think of all the different ways that you can do that. Tell the stories of support that you've received during the crisis. Talk about how the cruise lines helped you out. Talk about how the airlines helped you out. Tell those stories and get your message out. We, in US Virgin Islands, during COVID, most recently, our team developed and then helped to manage both the crisis communications website for the territory, but also the travel screening portal, where we were processing passengers coming in with their COVID tests. So we were, of course, helping to facilitate a return to travel, but the messaging was there throughout, and we were able to amplify that in social media and news releases and websites all over the place, saying the strong health protocols are in place. This destination is safe. Consumers should feel safe traveling here. So you have to think about going forward now. We're done dealing with the immediacy of the crisis. How do we want to talk about it now? What do you need to tell your consumers and all of your other audiences? You want to think also about both your internal and external communications at this point. You need to be consistent there. And then think about who can help you tell that message. After you're open again, the crisis has passed, think about, are you ready to maybe host some media on property or bring travel agents down? They can help to tell that story for you and really show from kind of a firsthand perspective and help build that confidence that you are in fact open. Things are back to normal. Here's what it's like on the ground. So I'll just move quickly then through the next couple of slides. I just made some lists here of kind of common, I really want you to do this. These are things you have to do when you're communicating in a crisis. And these, I'm not going to go through all these in detail. We can talk about them more in the conversation later. But you really need to make sure that you are being credible, accurate, and consistent with your messaging. And then I think even more important, if we move to the don'ts, there are a lot of things you don't want to do. Please don't come off as judgmental. Don't make any blame sort of statements. Don't play favorites with the media. If you give an exclusive to one media house, the others are going to, again, perhaps not be happy with you, but then also go out and find a source elsewhere that might not have accurate information. So just kind of keep these things in mind. These slides are available, but more importantly, I think you can go and find a full plan on CHTA's website that's going to help you with some of these do's and don'ts. Most importantly, just plan. You have to plan from the beginning, and then you'll be able to react and execute those plans as the crisis actually progresses. But I'm here, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Greta, and we'll get to some Q&A in a bit. We do have one question posted online, which I've noted, and we'll get to that shortly. And anybody else, please feel free to tap in your Q&A in there, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Well, let's finish up on Stan. Stan, I think you were close to the end there. So if we could pull up the document that Stan had pulled up, I think it was there was a comparison. Yeah, that's it. So Stan, you were talking about ways in which you might consider, with caution, obviously, knowing that there's some downsides to it as well, reducing your cost of your insurance, but also by looking at your deductible arrangement. And I think you had talked to us leading up to this slide, you had talked about ways to do that. Go ahead, Stan. Or you unmute yourself, Stan, so we can hear you. Okay.
That would definitely help, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Anyhow, my apologies for the glitch. I'm not sure exactly how much might have come across or not, but the use of higher deductible percentages can reduce the cost of the insurance. This slide shows the amount of insurance that an entity purchased. It's called the sum insured. And to the right, there's 4 columns that show what the premium would be based upon the 2, 3, 4, or 10% deductible. So if someone was in prior policies had a 2% deductible and they switched to a 10%, you can see the difference in the percent that the premium is of the sum insured represents a 30% savings. But keep in mind, the higher the deductible, the less money that a hotelier receives to do the repairs. But again, it's an evaluation of the cost containment versus the risk. If we can go back to the main slide, please.
That's interesting.
Okay. So also with regard to the deductibles, you want to make sure when you read the policy that the deductible is applied on a building by building basis, not the total. So if you have 5 buildings on a property or 2 buildings, one might be damaged severely and the other might not. So you only want the percentage applied to the on an item by item basis. The next item, coinsurance and replacement cost. In a number of venues, it's customary that the underwriters will say there's an 80% or a 90% coinsurance clause. That means you're not really insuring for 100%, or you don't have to. So there's, if you can bring up a slide on that, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so in the middle column, replacement cost appraisal. So those are numbers, and I'm using an illustration that there's 7 buildings in a property, and each building would have their own sum insured. So the replacement value for building number 1 is $2,241,000. Now you could purchase the insurance in that amount, but if the policy is written, say, with an 80% coinsurance clause, the sum insured could be $1.7 million, and that would allow for a savings in premium. But if you do purchase the sums insured at the 80% factor, if in the event there's a loss, then an insurance adjuster is going to be looking at whether or not you are underinsured. So in building number 2, where the sum insured that was purchased was $79,000 and a replacement cost is $115,000. If there were a loss on building number 2, in addition to evaluating what the loss was or agreeing to what the loss was, there's a case where you are underinsured and you'd only collect 68% of what the agreed to loss was. So if you use the approach of not insuring for 100% of replacement cost, recognize there is this additional step in the adjustment process that can create issues. But the way to get around that is to get an agreed value endorsement, which I spoke about earlier, having a replacement cost appraisal done and getting the underwriters to agree that those values are the replacement cost and get the endorsement. And in that event, an insurance adjuster will not be looking at whether or not you're underinsured or not. If we could go back to the main slide, please. So that is co-insurance. If we can go to the second page of this slide. Now, in some venues, more the British territories, they don't have what's called a co-insurance clause. There's an averaging clause. And you could use it to your same benefit, but primarily where insurers, and in writing the policy, will say the averaging clause, or you're only underinsured in the event your sum insured is less than 85% of replacement value. It's the same, the mechanics are the same. It's just called averaging versus co-insurance, but all averaging clauses in all policies are not the same, but recognize the fact that there are forms of policies that have this type of wording in it that says only if your sum insured is less than 85% of replacement value would then you be underinsured. But so it's another tool by which you don't have to insure for 100% of replacement value. The next 2 bullet points kind of go hand in hand. Look at your type of a construction. If the building is a concrete structure, particularly if it's like a laundry maintenance type building or what have you, maybe you don't want to insure that for windstorm and other catastrophic events. But you might want to insure it just for the contents, laundry machines or what have you. And that could also apply to any type of building. But again, look at the contents. So that basically does the presentation. I hope I stayed within the time limits, Frank. Sorry for the inconvenience.
No, this is very, very, lots of content and substance there. And people, again, should know that the details of this can all be reviewed online on our website as well. So,
and let me add, Frank, on a routine basis, there's a number of clients every year that I help out with risk management and reevaluating things. And it can be a time-consuming process, particularly if you have a number of buildings on a property.
Right. Very good. And I know from many of our members how helpful your advice, counsel has been in helping them to make sure they were well covered, but also more importantly as well, when a loss occurred, that they were securing every dollar they could secure to help with their recovery. So thanks much, Stan. Finally, we're going to go to the whole area of resources that are available through some of the resources that are available through CTO and CHTA. If we can go to Amanda, Amanda's going to you can bring that one up. Great. Amanda will speak to that, and then we have a couple of questions online already, and we'll get to some of that shortly. So Amanda, why don't you're clean up here, so why don't you take us through the last part here? Thank you.
Certainly. Next slide, Darcel. So good morning, everyone. I extend greetings from the CTO Secretariat, and we really are very pleased to partner with CHTA to culminate our education and awareness as part of preparedness actions for the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season. So my role is to sort of summarize some of what we would have heard over the past 2 days and point you in the direction of some resources that CHTA and the CTO have produced over the years, which are still very relevant and available to support preparedness and resilience broadly. So from the various webinars, even the previous webinar, we would have heard of the 4 stages of the disaster risk management continuum: preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. Actually, preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. And certainly there is a role for tourism sector practitioners across this continuum before, during, and after disaster, but we know that preparedness is key. Next slide. So as it relates to the role of CTO and CHTA, we support communication and sensitization efforts through the coordination of the PR Council. We also support crisis communication training. CTO has produced a crisis communication strategy for our government members that also serves public sector practitioners. And I believe CHTA also has produced a crisis communications plan. A key role and function, in addition to education and training, is collaborating with countries to support communications efforts before, during, and in particular after a crisis. And that is basically to inform the general public as it relates to the status of recovery and reopening. And we all remember 2017 and the number of countries that were impacted and our efforts related to that. Every quarter, CTO, CHTA, we partner with CIMH, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, and we produce a tourism climatic bulletin. So essentially, we use the climate forecast information that CIMH produces, and we adapt it, or we tailor it to the needs of the tourism sector. We also include tips or recommendations for actions to mitigate or manage whether unfavorable climatic conditions that are expected in the region as well as in source markets. And the information related to source markets can assist in informing tourism planning as well as marketing efforts. So I would say every 3 months, look out for that bulletin. It's available on CTO and CHTA website, and we also email to our various focal points. Next slide. So in terms of additional resources that we have produced, I have a list of these, and they are all available via our respective websites. So I will go to the next slide, which indicates the most recent and updated information. So in terms of the CHTA, resources via their website are organized in terms of what can support preparation or preparedness, information related to insurance, including checklists and various templates, and a manual to inform insurance readiness. And there are also resources related to response. In terms of the CTO, next slide, we produced in 2020 an updated multi-hazard risk management guide for the Caribbean tourism sector. So the guide includes risk management plans and templates, information, strategies, and it also includes checklists for preparedness actions, mitigation, response, and recovery. This resource is available via our ongoing education and awareness website. I've listed it there, www.ourtourism.onecaribbean.org. Moving on to the next slide, CTO finalized in 2020 an updated Caribbean Sustainable Tourism Policy and Development Framework. And that resource includes policy recommendations for the public sector, but showcases as well case studies and best practices that the private sector operators can adapt, we hope, learn from, replicate, etc. Again, I would encourage those of you that have not accessed this resource to download via both our website and our campaign hub, for which supports education and awareness. Next slide. So we were very, I think, proactive in recognizing that oftentimes manuals go underutilized. So in 2021, at the end of 2021, CTO and CHTA partnered with an organization, Bellsoft Learning Management, Inc., and we launched the Caribbean Tourism Institute. This is an online learning platform. And on this platform, another very proactive measure of the CTO, we have created 2 online courses which are freely available to our members, CTO member countries. And we can, extend to CHTA. We would have a discussion in that regard. But these 2 courses, one has been produced on the Multi-Hazard Risk Management Guide, and another course, freely available as well, is on the Caribbean Sustainable Tourism Policy Framework. So the courses are interactive, user-friendly, templates are downloadable, and the aim was to distill the information in a way that it can be assimilated more easily and foster adoption and use by the regional tourism sector. I would encourage you to go to the Caribbean Tourism website, Caribbean Tourism Institute.com. You can also Google CTI or the Caribbean Tourism Institute, and you should be able to register and have access to the courses. And my final slide, I believe you can proceed, Darcel. So based on the webinars, well, the 2 learning sessions we've had, I've compiled some key takeaways for resilience and recovery and sustainability, sorry. So from the presentation of SIDIMA, we learned the importance of intersectoral collaboration. We also learned at the national level the importance of the tourism sector being incorporated in disaster risk management strategies. So we are encouraging the public and private sector to liaise with your disaster management offices to support the establishment of a tourism emergency management committee. This is listed as a national best practice. And we believe, though, it's important at both the public sector level and the individual private sector level to have an emergency management committee formally established with clear roles and responsibilities. We learned today about the importance of crisis communications. I want to emphasize, though, the key is having protocols for visitor and staff management, as well as how are you going to communicate? What is the system or mechanism to provide information that is timely, that is accurate, that is honest to both visitors and staff? As it relates to training and sensitization, we learned from from CDIMA and CIMH, the importance, and this was reiterated today by Greta, the importance of simulations, establishing a tourism emergency management plan, but annually updating that plan, refreshing as needed. Given, for example, the onset of the pandemic, we want to ensure that health protocols or health considerations are included in terms of the tourism emergency management plan. And we learned as well of the importance of insurance and business continuity planning. These also underpin preparedness actions. And in the guides and manuals that we have created, you will find information related to retrofitting and other actions or activities to ensure the safety of real estate, right? Buildings and facilities, etc. So that concludes my wrap up, and I want to end with a quote by Elizabeth Riley, who is now the executive director at CDIMA. Next slide, Darcel. Oh, I guess you have the wrong presentation. But Liz, at a recent seminar in highlighting the importance of disaster preparedness, indicated that tourism is about people. Unlike any other sector, the commodity, for want of a better word, is people. So in preparing for any eventuality, we need to take into account that at any time there is a crisis, there will be foreign visitors, you know, in hotels, in various facilities, and essentially in our destinations. So as we prepare to protect residents, citizens, it is also important to factor how we will treat with visitors and what protocols have been established to inform them accurately, to prepare for shelter, for evacuation if needed, and ultimately to inform when we are now ready to receive, when we are open rather for the public to receive new visitors. So in a nutshell, thank you for the opportunity, Frank and colleagues, to partner, and we certainly support the CDIMA process in terms of participating in the disaster management, damage and needs assessment, post impact.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you for that, tremendous amount of substance. You addressed some of the questioning that was online as well, that what resources are available, and I think you gave a good overview of the various types of resources from CTO and CHTA that are available. But also you made a point about the local, one of your recommendations was on the local engagement. And we know from our experience that when partnerships exist at the local level, they can really go a long way towards readiness and recovery and so on, strong partnerships. They're not prevalent, and really it's up to the public and private sector stakeholders on these lines from the various destinations to promote and advance and advocate for that kind of collaboration that's really absolutely essential. It's tied to the communications, the planning, and everything. There was a question as well about and by the way, we just completed an overview of what needs exist within the small tourism sector, small enterprises, in terms of crisis readiness and response. And we'll be putting forward some policy recommendations and programmatic recommendations at a conference in Jamaica later this July, based on the recommendations from that research of over 500 small businesses, small tourism related businesses in the region. So there's a lot going on that we're doing at the regional level, but it really gets down to that grassroots, what happens on the ground. And when we have the committees that exist, and they're working as well with the local emergency management agency and so on, that's where that should be a year-round effort practically. The question was raised about business continuity planning. How often should we do that? Should be doing it every year. We should be reviewing it. and basically then saying, okay, what did we do well last year? What haven't we done well? What do we need to work on? Those kinds of things come into play. Our roles at CTO and CHTA are to be facilitators, advocates, and conduits for knowledge and information sharing. And that's what we try to do. And I think, we just encourage you to tap into that. I'm just going to take time for just a couple of quick questions, maybe one to Jennifer. Jennifer, we basically, Tropical Shipping has been a regional leader in supporting companies and countries with their recovery. You've been in a unique position to observe how effective governments and the private sector work together towards recovery. From your experience, how critical, we just mentioned it, but I wanted to hear from you as well, how critical, because you deal with it every day in multiple destinations. How critical is this collaboration, and what makes for a good partnership for recovery, and what are the pitfalls to having good collaboration?
Thank you, Frank. I feel like I'm going to have to restate exactly what Amanda has said. I think she answered that question excellently in her presentation, and it is critically important. It's about partnership. It's about collaborating way in advance of any anticipated disaster. The best practices that I have observed is pretty much one of the things that Amanda made reference to is establishing what is referred to as a tourism management committee. There are, we signed on with CDMA back in 2014 or 2015 at the advent of the CRM plans with CDMA, where we agreed to jump in and support CDMA in its effort towards its responsiveness. So we're now part of a volunteer group that supports whenever there's a disaster declared, wherever it is, that we will jump in and support that location based on the protocols that we have established in advance with CDMA and its local emergency management. So for me, the best observations that I have made over the years started with an example that FEMA on the USA side, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and I oftentimes said to them, I think you mimicked this and copied it from back in the day when it was CDERA, now CDMA, was how do you set the protocols in place? How do you show up as a partner in your local community? Because let's admit it, the private sector has the resources. They can get access to their tools. They can help use their equipment to clear roads and do whatever, while the government's responsibility is ensuring public safety in the first place. What has happened? How's the damage? How do we engage? Those are the best practices. I don't need to paraphrase what Amanda has described. It exists. Everyone on this call should be a partner to that effort. That's collaboration.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Stan, on the insurance question, part of this, how fast an insurance claim can be expedited can mean the difference between a business recovering and it failing. So, so what can businesses do and what can governments do to help ensure a claim is expedited as quickly as possible without compromising one's ability to maximize their claim?
It's an excellent point, Frank, because the sooner you get the process moving, if it's a major event, everybody will be inundated. Things that, in some of the larger clients that I have, in a way of preparation, I even have the name of the adjusting firm and the insurance adjuster named in the policy. And what that allows us to do is, if we know an event is coming, get out there and look at the property ahead of time and make sure that we're both on the same page and we can be on premises as soon as possible. If not, be there in event before the event occurs to really be on the ground. And in cases of locations where they've sustained previous losses, if you can have some pre-loss inspections done by the insurance brokers, or if there's some local adjusters on island as opposed coming from overseas, get them out to look at the property and see that the property is in good condition, and in particular that it's been repaired from previous losses.
Right.
You know, if you can line up some individuals to help uh, construction people or consultants to help get the claim prepared as soon as possible, or some realm of magnitudes.
Right.
It doesn't have to be detailed, and have them provided so that the insurance adjuster and the insurance company can set up adequate reserves.
Right. Very good. Jeff Birch, a small hotel operator out of Andros in the Bahamas. You've been through a number of claims. What works for you well, and what have been your challenges? Jeff, if you can unmute yourself and chime in, that'd be good.
There you go. I think that one of the largest issues that we've had to battle is the pulling together of the information after the claim. I want to, all of your speakers have touched bases with prior to a disaster, and everything that they've said is right. You engage your staff, you prepare, you need to help to take care of your staff, etc. After the storm, obviously you do the same thing. However, when it comes to trying to get, I don't know, a final settlement with the insurance company, they have a certain process that they follow. And invariably, if it's a large claim, there's going to be an adjuster. So that's where I've had great difficulty. However, I have to mention Stan, who is a panelist, and will give him the greatest reference known to man. He's helped us in 2 or 3 of issues that we've had. And he's pulled together the details. It gets very, very complicated. And my experience with the insurance companies is not that they're out to screw you, for lack of other words, but they definitely are going to go by the small print on the policy. And I don't know how many owners or operators have looked at the small print of their policy, but even trying to figure that out, because it can be in a word, it can be in a statement. I highly recommend that anybody who is able, that they engage prior to a disaster, a person like Stan, and after a disaster, immediately contact I think they're called, Stan, what do you call yourself? Public adjuster, I think.
That's true. There are licensed adjusters that represent the insureds.
Right.
Correct.
And yeah, and because as an owner operator, I have this old saying, and anybody who's ever heard me talk, when you're up to your ass in alligators, it's hard to remember your intent was to drain the swamp. Well, after a storm, you are up to your ass in alligators. I mean, it is trying to get power, any frozen stuff that you have, dealing with your staff, dealing with the cleanup. So that's the only thing, Frank, that I would really say to any person who engages in a preventative method and after a storm, hire a public adjuster. I can only recommend Stan because he's honorable, he's trustworthy, he's a good man, and you have to be careful. There are some shysters out there. So I would suggest that everybody do their homework prior to having a disaster.
Thanks, Jeff. I didn't realize they had alligators in Andros. I learned something new today, but
yeah,
okay.
boa constrictors then, boa constrictors,
Okay.
hammerheads.
One final question for Greta.
Let me say thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. But also one more thing, if I may. I mean, it's a known fact that a layman cannot necessarily understand everything that's in an insurance policy. So at a minimum, try to get the insurance broker to come out to your property and sit down together with him and ask him where the problems are. And I mean, something that can be so basic is look at the section in the policy that deals with exclusions. And there's one excluded properties. I mentioned foundations, and in a policy, the language will be earthen structures. So, you know, there's a little interpretation there. Now, if a hotel uses the foundations as cisterns, I mean, that's really important. And if there's an earthquake, needs to say it can be extremely important, but you really need to read the policy and go through it. And if appropriate, sit down with the insurance broker or someone from the insurance company and get them to visit the property and help look at the risks. But they will tell you, you have to establish your own sum of insurance. They don't want to take on that risk. That's the issue.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. I'd like to go on actually, but I've been told that we've got to wrap up. So we've gone over by about 15 minutes what we're allocated. But it's been good, and it's been great to see that our participants have hung in there. This session has been recorded. It'll be available to CHTA and CTO members at some point within the next couple of days, as well as all of those other resources that Amanda covered as well. If you want to get in touch with either organization, there's some contact information right there, and you'll have this on what's shared with you in a couple of days as well. Thank you again for joining us, each of you. You've been incredible. I wish we had another hour because I think we could get into a really nice, engaging conversation, but so be it. Special thank you to each of you. We invite you to get in touch with us and follow us, in your social media platform of choice to be informed and connect with your peers. On behalf of CHTA and CTO, we hope you have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to having you join us again. Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. It was great. Thank you, everyone. Keep safe.
Thank you.
Everyone.